On today's episode, we take a look at parallels between the overturning of Roe v. Wade and Star Wars. Check out an accidentally based take by Keith Olbermann. Learn that killing a human being is okay because technically it's a medical procedure. Dissect a popular gun control infographic. And finally, dive into some common misinformation put out there by the pro-choice crowd. This is Cringe Posts. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Cringe Post podcast. This is the podcast where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes that we see in our feeds every week. And we pick apart where they went wrong, some of the underlying assumptions that they might have, and we try to have a bit of a fun and a laugh along the way. I'm here with my co-host Donald. And before we get started, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our show. It really helps us out. And if you're listening to this podcast, make sure to go to cringepost.com. We have a link to the visual show companions so you can kind of check out the different posts that we have visually. We have memes and pictures, and you can actually read through the posts as we go through them. Before we go picking apart other people's posts, we like to take kind of a walk down memory lane and look at our past cringy posts. And I've got one here from Donald Kimball, and Donnie and I are big fans of Star Wars, and I think it was 2012 Disney bought Star Wars, right? That's what. Okay, so in 2012 Disney bought Star Wars. And Donnie tweeted this out. He tweeted, "A lot of people are worried about Star Wars Episode 7. Frankly, my only concern is whether or not Ewoks are in it. Please, no Ewoks." If only that was the only thing to be worried about.
I know. It's not to say that I don't hate Ewoks still. I still do. But that's my only concern. That I was a little too optimistic, I think, seeing the trajectory of those poor films.
Man, I mean, I would give me Ewoks, but you have to take away, Rose and Admiral Holdo and basically the whole Rey Skywalker storyline, and I'd be okay with that trade. Well, I'll take Ewoks.
And think about it. Think about it this way: not only did we get, we have Ewoks. Not only do we have all these terrible plot lines and bad character development, we also got Porgs in Episode 8 that were, whether or not you want to say it's worse or not, I think they were completely incidental to the plot, and yet they were so focused on for no reason, and it was so stupid.
Sell plushie toys.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's something terribly infuriating about Ewoks being central to the plot of Episode 6 and taking on the Empire. I think that's really stupid. But there's almost something more infuriating about the Porgs having nothing to do with the plot and just being there. Just as such an obvious cash grab. It makes me so mad.
Yeah, it's the whole Star Wars saga. I mean, it really has been Disneyfied. Like, it's just, it's, and Disney has a great model for business in terms of like, hey, we make, they used to make really good stories with really, really cute characters. So they can make double the amount of money by, movie tickets and then selling really awesome toys to your kids. But that doesn't really apply to Star Wars. And they've kind of, in some areas, they figured it out. In other areas, they have not. And Star Wars under Disney's reign, I think I would give it maybe a C-, maybe a D+. It's not been that great.
Yeah, I agree. Well, their first mistake was scrapping all the game studios and games in development. That was a big miss. What a disaster.
Yeah, it was a huge miss. All right, speaking of Star Wars, for our first cringe take, and I thought this was perfect for it. So this episode comes a few days after the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, basically returning the decision of whether or not abortion is legal back to the states. And so, believe it or not, there are some people on Twitter that are just having absolute meltdowns. And this person tweeted out, "Remember in Star Wars when an old man power in the galaxy refused to change or fade away to the point where he became a rotten half corpse on a meat hook in hell? And then his plan was to possess and control a woman's body to further his fascist goals. Let's remember how that went." And then they post a clip of Rey in Episode 9 deflecting the Emperor's lightning back at him and killing him. First of all, I mean, why in the world would you make an analogy to maybe the worst Star Wars film ever made? And not only the worst Star Wars film ever made, but maybe the worst scene in the worst Star Wars film ever made. I mean, this untrained, awful Mary Sue character deflects this lightning that even Mace Windu and the great masters of the entire canon haven't been able to figure out. and somehow she wins. It's just a terrible analogy. But I think this also speaks to, a lot of these people that post these things, and we'll get into more of the abortion arguments here in a little bit, but these people view themselves as the heroes, right? And I think that's a lot of the reasons why like Disney also like branded the new like the Rebel Alliance as the Resistance, because everyone was talking about when Trump was elected, oh, we're going to resist and all this stuff. And it's just in poor taste. Like, these people have never encountered like hardship in the way that you have to stand up for something that's right, even though everyone else around you is telling you that it's wrong. I mean, ironically, the people that are pro-life, that are standing up for pro-life, or who are standing up against the vaccine mandates, a while back, those are the people that are more like the Resistance or the Rebel Alliance, and that everyone around them, and the establishment, the accepted public opinion was against them, and because they had a principle, they stood up for it. So it always kind of irks me when these people compare their, the view that they hold that is totally acceptable for them to hold in the workplace, and that the New York Times also echoes. They think they're so brave for tweeting something out about that and likening themselves to these heroes. I guess it's okay. You can liken yourself to Rey because she did nothing to earn her hero's journey. She just kind of arrived without any struggle. So I guess that is kind of in line with who they are.
It's funny. One thing, I was at a staff retreat recently with my employer, and we were talking about different aspects of different groups in the state. And someone was pointing out how interesting it is that, we live in Washington state, and the think tank I work for is a free market one, right? And how Washington is a very blue state. All of the institutions that are, very strong in the state tend to be left. You've got huge environmental lobbies, you've got huge teachers union lobbies, you've got right now full Democrat control of the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion. So you have, overwhelmingly one side in power. But you hear them behind the scenes, like when you can sort of either see public disclosure requests or leaks or whatever, and they're like, crap, we're losing. Like we have to silence these people, or we have to squash this. They're like, these people don't act like they're in power and control. And it's very, very interesting because there's some level of delusion going on there. And I think it kind of mirrors this "we're the resistance" type language from this post and from the general Trump reviews. And even people right now acting as though the overturning of Roe v. Wade is this massive defeat to abortion. Now, granted, in some states, it will be, right? If if you're someone living in Kansas, you're probably going to have a much harder time getting an abortion. But these people act like it's this massive blow. And to me, as someone who's pro-life and wants to be part of the broader pro-life movement, this is like, okay, we have our work to do. It's like the hurdle that was in our way just got lifted. Now the work begins. It's kind of it's not like this isn't the victory. We can celebrate it as a victory.
You're now allowed to fight, right? You're now allowed to change people's minds, and there's actually an effect that can happen.
Exactly. You're not just constitutionally, forbidden from doing so. And so it's interesting to me that they're always feeling this, even though, again, it's like you go to the actual court decision of Roe v. Wade. You look at the case and how just absolutely bungled it was, and how insufficient the argumentation was, really on both sides, and just the sloppy decision. And I mean, from a legal perspective of someone who has no feelings one way or the other, it was a bad decision. It was a bad case. It was a bad decision. I think the same thing can be said for Oberfelge, which is the gay marriage one. Which is one of the reasons why Justice Thomas brings it up in his concurrence as going back. And these people, go to their hysterics about, oh, this is it. The powers are coming in. We have to resist. And it's like, well, maybe you should actually look at the decisions and recognize that if you believe in this institution, that is the Supreme Court, it's supposed to be an unbiased, you and I laughing here, but supposed to be this unbiased jurisprudence of, what does the Constitution say? How do we interpret it? And if a decision is made poorly, like the execution of that and the reasoning is bad, even if the outcome's good, ideally, this kind of institution is supposed to undo those bad decisions. You're not supposed to wait on the outcomes. And that's how a lot of decisions have been made. So undoing that's actually really a good thing if you believe in this institution. to begin with.
Yeah, and speaking of believing in institutions, let's move to our next one. We can continue that conversation. So we've got Keith Olbermann, one of our favorites, tweeting out, and this was with the Supreme Court decision to, I don't know exactly like the operative word, but basically they said, hey, New York, you can't go and force people to not get concealed carry permits and all this stuff. Like, it's a constitutional right to carry, be able to concealed carry, so you have to allow that. So Keith, weirdly, that is the least important decision that came down in the past week, which is just wild. But Keith Olbermann tweeted out upon this news, it has become necessary to dissolve the Supreme Court of the United States. The first step is for a state the court has now forced guns upon to ignore this ruling. Great. You're a court. Why and how do you think you can enforce your rulings? Hashtag ignore the court. And here's the thing. We commented on this with our Twitter profile, but this guy was accidentally based here, right?
Absolutely.
He's just not, he's coming from a pick and choose standpoint though, right? Like ironically, Roe v. Wade would be overturned later and this guy would be singing a different tune, about that. But we kind of agree with him on this in that, we should dissolve the court. We shouldn't have 9 people that are biased, right? They are biased because they're named conservative or Democratic, leaning justices, and there's a pretty clear ideological bent to how they rule. And they should not be the ones, someone in Washington, D.C. in a robe should not be deciding what someone in Washington State on the other side of the country is doing. We think that it's best left up to, the state and even the county, even the town, even, dare I say, the individual to decide what should happen and what should be enforced based on property rights. And this is just we run into this all the time, right? These guys don't actually have a principle, and in absence of a principle, they flip-flop. I guarantee if we went to Keith Olbermann's profile, he'd have something, he'd have a hashtag ignore the court, but it would be from the totally other aspect of like the court needs to enforce this federally, right? And these people also just don't understand like how the purpose of the judicial branch, right? Which is they're just ruling whether this right, whether abortion right or the right to carry and bear arms is enumerated in the Constitution. So that's where you get people saying stuff like, hey, abortion's been banned. It's like, no, that's not what the Supreme Court did. The Supreme Court just said, hey, that's not included in the Constitution. So it's not a constitutional right that has to be guaranteed. But, the right to carry and bear arms is, and so New York can't make a law against that. What are your thoughts?
Well, my first thought is the first step is for for a state, for a state to ignore this ruling. Let's start with Roe v. Wade. I don't think he'd love that. But Roe v. Wade, of course, was a Supreme Court decision that protected, the constitutional right to an abortion. So I think that by this logic, he's probably very happy that the Dobbs decision undid the Roe v. Wade decision, because the Dobbs decision is one that removed the court's power or the court saying or enforcing something. So I'm sure Keith Olbermann's all happy about Dobbs, right? The second thing that strikes me about this is that's really funny is this whole accidentally based tweet demonstrates the very reason why individuals carrying guns is valuable. Like, he's like, oh, how great. How are you going to enforce your rulings?
Yes.
And it's like, yeah. It's like, well, a state would probably do that via the executive branch and probably through the military in some way, shape, or form, or the police force. So if you want to resist a ruling, you probably need to do so with guns, which is just the irony of it is very, very sweet. And again, we've talked about it on some of the gun issue posts we've had, but these people can't decide between, an individual having a gun is the most dangerous and terrifying thing, or you would never be able to stop a tyrannical government with it. You don't need it. They can't decide between these things. And this is just another kind of funny flip where it's like, great. How are you going to force a state to acknowledge people to have guns? It's like, well, probably helps if the person gets a gun and then defends themselves with it. It's just a very backwards, weird thing to say that a state should reject an allowance. You know what I mean? Like, they should reject a freedom to carry something through force, but in order to defend itself from guaranteeing that right, you would need some aspect of force. It's just very convoluted and backwards. And I think it clarifies that a lot of people, especially the ones who are in the political game and the political scene for a long time, they don't think about rulings and policies and laws and decisions. They don't think about them in terms of force. They don't think about it in terms of, when I say you have to do this thing or you're forced to do this thing, ultimately it comes down to a threat of violence. They don't think about that, because if you did think about everything being enacted through force, violence, or threat of force through, even just, what's the word? Like a preemptive show of force, right? This tweet makes no sense. A state has guns forced upon it, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And if they're saying, how is the court going to enforce that ruling? But you're saying that you don't want to enforce it, but the enforcement requires there not being guns, which means by nature you can't use force. It's just very backwards and weird, and it makes no sense, and it's complete rubbish when you think about it.
Yeah, and that's, like we've talked about, it's very hard to form a coherent argument or even a sentence if you don't have a principle that underlies it that you can kind of check back on and base yourself off of. And that's what was I going to say about this? The thing about like the thing about folks like Keith Olbermann is, I like the spirit of like, hey, what are you going to do about it? Right? Like, right. I like that. Right. That's a really good spirit to have, right? Because if you truly believe that something is right, you have a right to like defend that and go after that. I don't think Keith Olbermann actually believes one way or the other. I think he only believes in having power and virtue signaling. But I really like that. And I hope that spirit kind of continues. It's the spirit of nullification, right? Mm-hmm. But these guys, man, they don't actually believe it, right? They only believe it when it applies to them, because they hated it, right? During the vaccine mandates, when, Florida or Texas or Oklahoma or any of these, or, North Dakota, any of these states said, you know what, you want to enforce this vaccine mandate on us? Like, go ahead, come try and do it. And these guys shrieked about it and said the federal government needs to go in and make these things happen. I think it was I was listening on Timcast. Austin Peterson was talking about in his home state, they actually passed a law that if the federal government passes any gun laws that kind of contradict the laws in his state, the police officers are not allowed to actually aid federal agents in enforcing those laws when they come in the state, or else they risk a fine, which I thought was awesome. Like, that's like nullification. That's like legalizing freedom, right? Like that's nullification in action, and that's a really good thing. And at the end of the day, it's all about, we believe the people that are best, posed to make decisions are the people that are closest to the issue at hand that's being decided.
Definitely. And that is not Keith Olbermann. I think if anyone is, going to be regarded as close to Emperor Palpatine in Episode 9, I think Keith Olbermann makes a pretty good case.
Old, decrepit, a little bit cringe. Yeah. No reason. Somehow he returned.
Through no act of relevancy, he returns.
So I've got a Facebook comment here, and I'll give a little bit of background. So I saw someone posting on my Facebook feed about how, the classic abortion's okay because it's just a clump of cells. So I kind of started talking. I was like, hey, no, that's actually not really, the case. I think you can make a pretty compelling point that it is, in fact, life. And then this person tried to use appeal to authority, basically saying, well, no established scientists believe what you're saying. So I was like, okay, like, I know that there's actually been studies done. And in fact, 95% of biologists agree that life begins at conception and that it's considered a human life. So I posted a link to the study. And this person could not understand anything about references or didn't even bother to read the paper. But she said this to me. She asked, what are the biologists you're referring to? The ones in the paper that you didn't read. But then she followed up and she said, also, when life begins is one thing, but abortion is a separate thing and a medical procedure that shouldn't have any relation to religion. Separation of church and state, my dude. I didn't bring up any religious argument in this entire conversation. It was just, this is a pure ad hominem attack. But I think this was kind of wild to me, right? And this is where I think you and I were talking before the show about how you and I and the pro-life movement view life starting at conception. And if life starts at conception, that means that it's killing a human being. An abortion, a medical procedure, if you want to call it that, is killing a human being. And if it's done for elective purposes, right, not in an event to save the mother's life or anything like that, we don't consider that an abortion, then it's murder, right? And that's as cut and dry as I think it can be. And this person obviously believes the complete opposite, right? There's almost no way to reconcile that. And I thought this was a really nice encapsulation of kind of the differences in opinion that are so stark in contrast that I'm not sure like reconciliation is possible. I mean, other than the fact that this person is completely at odds with science, right? And she tried to pull out, I should send you the thread, but she tried to pull out, she's like some biomedical researcher, and she tried to pull out, well, I've been in biomedical research for 7 years, so I would know. And I was like, you haven't given me an argument, dude. Like, you could give me another study that says something. You could provide evidence that, contradicts my point that it's a human life from conception. But she just resorted to saying ad hominem and appealing to her own authority, which I guess is kind of the worst version of appeal to authority fallacy there is.
Well, if you just keep asking, what biologists are you referring to over and over? If you just kind of ignore and deny the evidence right in front of you, I mean, you really can't get her. What are you going to do? Just say, my invisible friends here that you just aren't clicking the link to see? I love this. Abortion is a separate thing and a medical procedure. It's like, okay, are you arguing that I have the right to perform a lobotomy on you because it's a medical procedure and it's separate from when life begins? It doesn't matter that, Britt, you're in your 20s. I'm doing a medical procedure, sir. Now let me cut your brain out. Like, what does that mean? It's funny because it's almost like a version of appeal to authority within the name of like the thing, like the authority being a medical procedure. You know what I mean? It's like you're appealing to the authority that no, this is classified something else, which is the other funny thing about it is to say, well, sure, but a medical procedure can be have the wrong context too.
You shouldn't be labeled a medical procedure, maybe.
Well, right. Well, even if it was, I mean, in the same way that like think about it this way. If you are in a situation like, classic action movie scene, okay? There's like a swarm of bad guys, like soldiers coming up at you, and you're in a tunnel and you're escaping with a group of women and children, and you tell the group of women and children, go lock the door behind you, I'll hold them off, and bolt the door shut, okay? And then run, okay? They do that, and you tell them to do that, you voluntarily do that, you sacrifice yourself to hold them off to buy them time. Okay, that is intrinsically different than doing the exact same thing, except the guy didn't say, bolt the door behind me, I'm going to stay and fight them. And them just going and bolting the door and locking one person on the other side of that door. The contexts there are very different. In one case, the guy's saying, hey, do this, I'm asking you to do this, I'm volunteering. The other, he's not, okay? But they're the same actions. So to say that, like, again, when life begins is one thing, but this is a medical procedure. Like that. What? That's like saying, well, look, having your pets be in your house is one thing, but this is a fumigation. We're just trying to kill the rodents and the rats in your house. It's like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't do that before I take my pets out of there. Again, the actions can be the same, and things that aren't directly linked, although in this case, abortion and when life begins are, but to grant her, if they are separate things, it doesn't mean they have no relevance to each other. Let me get my pets out of the house so you don't kill them with a fumigation, even though my pets and a fumigation don't have anything to do with each other necessarily. They do once you decide to fumigate my house with my pets in them. So yeah, when life begins and a medical procedure don't have anything to do with each other until the medical procedure impedes on that right to life when life begins. And that's not even touching the separation of church and state thing, which is so goofy.
I know when I saw this, I was like, okay, murder, you can have the concept of murder without believing in any God, and whether you should be able to murder someone or not. I'm pretty sure that's a pretty secular thing that stands on its own without any of those morals. I mean, I think that you probably without God, you start to justify murder as this person is doing. But I mean, in terms of how it functionally works in our society, you don't have God as a part of that.
Well, and I just want to tackle this issue because there's so many inconsistencies with it. Okay, it's the same thing when people say like that one post we did recently about I'm an originalist, so I only believe in muskets or whatever. These people always try to appeal to the founding fathers' lines when it benefits them, and then as soon as it doesn't, they say they don't know anything, they don't have any relevance. So first of all, what's in the Bill of Rights is no establishment of religion. What that means, if you look at the context in which it was written, is in particular you cannot use the state to persecute and justify other denominations, right? That's what they came from England. You think of Mary Bloody Mary, and then you think of the peace from Elizabeth, but the Catholic and Protestant warring and things. That is what that means. It does not mean that your state does can have absolutely zero influence or reference to things of a religious nature. I mean, there's so many quotes from the founding fathers talking about how in order to have a free society, you need a religious one that takes ethics and values. And here's the thing: I'm not even proposing theocracy here, but what I'm saying is that if you ignore the idea that your values come from somewhere, and then those values are going to influence policy that you set if you're a government, you're just stupid, because that's what's going to happen. So separation of church and state literally can never be a thing. Second, the letter that was written in was talking about the state not influencing the church because, again, of the context where they came from, where Anglicanism had been sort of formed through the state, through King Henry VIII. The reformers used sort of the state's breakaway as a tool to sort of implement their religion, and then it kind of backfired a little bit, and it started getting used to influence the things of the church. And so again, this is all of the context it's in. So these people, when they talk about separation of church and state, they don't know what they're talking about. They're just saying it because it's an easy phrase to quote, and they don't have any idea of the context. And the moment you would say any of this to them, and then bring up the quotes about the founding fathers saying things like you need a religious population, even the founding fathers who weren't Christian, mind you, saying this, they'd be like, well, they were just a bunch of white men who owned slaves. And you're like, okay, so you don't actually care. Got it.
Yep. The inconsistency about the medical procedure and when life begins and not being connected or having any bearing on the argument reminded me of Kermit Gosnell. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but basically he for those of you who don't know about him, he was an abortionist, a really awful one, in that he actually segregated women in his clinic into black and whites, and he himself was a black abortionist, which is kind of interesting. But for about 30 years, he was doing birth-induced abortions. So what he would do is he would induce the woman to birth out the kid, and then he would wait until the kid was all the way out, fully breathing, fully alive, fully viable, and then he would do different types of methods of actually killing that child. Just to kind of experiment, whether it was, I'm not going to get into it because it's really gruesome. But anyways, he did this 1,800 times. I think he had 3 or 4 women actually die because this is a very, very unsafe way of performing these abortions. And when he stood trial, part of his defense, which I found really interesting, was that he actually had someone read a really detailed description of how a normal abortion is done. One of the variety of ways, where they reach in, they actually start pulling the baby apart and stuff. And he's like, look, that's no different than what I was doing, right? He's not wrong, right? He's not wrong. The normal abortion procedure is the exact same. You're ripping a human life, ripping it apart, whether it's in the womb or out of the womb, does not matter. It's a human life, and you're causing it pain. It can feel the pain. It is perfectly aware of what is going on, and you're killing it. And Kermit Gosnell, even though he killed 1,800 people, which would make him the most prolific serial killer in American history, he got, I think it was 30 years or something like that in jail. It's not terribly long. He's going to die in there. He was pretty old when he got caught. And what's crazy about this, man, is that they were tipping people off like 10, 20 years before he was actually arrested, that he was doing bad stuff and not just harming, killing innocent children, but he was also had unsanitary conditions that resulted in women dying. But because the state had such invested interest in making sure that abortion wasn't looked down upon or anything like that, they chose to turn the blind eye, and there's documented evidence of that. And so in this scenario, even, Kermit Gosnell, in my opinion, the most prolific serial killer in American history, agrees with this person. Abortion is just a medical procedure. Same with him committing infanticide.
Absolutely.
All right. On to our next one. This is on the heels of the gun decision that we, I guess this is a totally different one. So gosh, man, so much stuff has happened in just a week and a half. So Congress passed some legislation that basically federally mandated or federally funded, I think is probably the proper way to put it, red flag laws across the country. And so these are now in place, and people have been putting out this infographic that basically tries to make it look like red flag laws are a good thing. So this infographic says how red flag laws work to prevent mass shootings. This is Jane. Jane's social media contact, Randy, posts photos of guns and cryptic messages. Jane calls the police to report the posts. The police petition in court to temporarily remove Randy's guns. Police provide evidence that Randy is a danger to himself and others. The court agrees to a temporary removal of Randy's weapons. Now, if anyone has ever, the first part that struck me about this is the word temporary. If anyone has ever worked or dealt with the cops confiscating something from you, not even just a firearm, let's just say it's just a car, or maybe they did, they took some, camera equipment or laptops. You're probably never going to see those things ever again. Temporary might as well mean infinity. It's never going to be given back to you. It's permanent. Just because of the way the state works, they don't do those things. They conveniently end up in someone in the department's hands or in their personal use or at the department's use. It reminds me of, I saw this post from a police department where they had confiscated, through civil asset forfeiture, they had confiscated a Ferrari from some poor owner, and they had reskinned it for their police officers to drive around in. So at the end of this infographic, no, it's not going to be temporary. If you get red flagged, you're never going to be able to have a weapon ever again, which is really unfortunate. And then two, the thought that it's really interesting that the left, who doesn't like cops at all, also somehow unanimously believes that they're going to be perfect and unbiased and in their way that they decide, who they're going to actually red flag and who they consider a threat. This is, I think I see you've posted the other meme, and I'll let you go through it. But this is just a way for people that are angry at each other, someone that doesn't like a conservative. And then, we've seen it before. People will construe someone saying, hey, I like Donald Trump, or hey, even they label pro-lifers as pro-life extremists, right? So even if I posted something that was pro-life, they could say, hey, this is an extremist, rhetoric. I think that's enough to get someone's weapon taken away. We don't want that happening around here. It's not a good way for liberty to prosper. And ironically, everyone will be affected by this. The people that need guns the most, the people that can actually keep authority in check, are not going to be able to get them. And this is just a tattletale society being created right in front of our eyes.
Yeah, I mean, there's the post that I saw. I think a lot of people have shared this image, and the one that I believe the one I saw this from, I believe he said something like, "Here's how red flag laws don't violate due process." I was like, but this little infographic shows nothing about due process. Due process means you get the right to defend yourself, not not that the police get to decide that for you. Like, that's insane. I found this particularly troubling that they were using this and trying to present it as though it defended your civil liberties when it really does not. So yeah, the second meme here, this is sort of the response that was made, and our good friend, I saw, again, shared by a lot of people. It's made by the Firearms Policy Coalition. And so it sort of plays on this from the other perspective, right? Where it says, this is Randy. Randy posts a harmless picture of himself and his son at the gun range. Karen sees Randy's post and calls local state agents to report suspicions that Randy might be a risk to the community. Biased state agents look at Randy's social media and use newly granted red flag powers to claim that Randy is a dangerous threat. Without allowing Randy a defense, state agents and the local court determine it's okay to confiscate his guns and use deadly force. Randy is awakened at 3 a.m. by loud crashing noises, flashbangs, and death threats while his wife and son scream in terror. Randy is murdered while instinctively trying to protect his family. And that's how these things actually play out, you know? That's what you actually see happen in these cases, in so many aspects. And the thing is, the entire thing is that the right to self-defense is an innate right that the state recognizes, not that the state grants. The state has no right to take that away from you without evidence of wrongdoing, you know? When you have demonstrated your harm to other people, that's one thing. When you're pulling your gun out and you're aiming at someone and you're threatening them, that is one thing. But the problem is that all of this is up to interpretation. And the way that the culture's gone is we've gone as far as to say things like, well, microaggressions are violence. Words, you know, your hateful words to me are violence. And so how long does it get before a post like, you know, an innocuous post, like in the example of posting yourself at the gun range, becomes a literal threat of violence to people who don't know how to define the word literally correctly and don't know how to define the word violence correctly or how to use the word threat correctly. All of these things, and again, part of something what I said in the previous episode with the sort of destruction of language is to shape things in such a way that people who control the narratives get more power, and that's what this ultimately does. These red flag laws, all they do is consolidate power in the hands of the people who already have the most control and want to control your lives more, and you don't have a fighting chance against it, because if a court determines that your rhetoric was extremist, guess what? You get your gun taken away. Let alone, think about John Brennan talking about, you know, the different terrorist threats, domestic terrorists, like libertarians and things like that. Remember his whole list where he threw us in there. So no, these red flag laws are terrible, and they do violate all kinds of civil liberties.
I think what's really striking to me about this meme that you've posted here, and this is another good reason if you're listening to go to the cringepost.com to check out the visual show companion, but is that people don't understand that one of the biggest problems about police officers is that they have action bias, right? If they are given power, if they are given equipment, if they are given, any sort of institutional, law to use or to regulate, they have the bias to actually do it, right? Even if it's not necessarily warranted or needed, especially if there's like zero consequences for them, which, qualified immunity and all these things make it so. And so, what do you think happens when you pass this ability to claim that you stopped some deadly potential mass shooter, and that by doing it you get props and you have the ability to basically shake someone down, take their defense away from them without any due process, and then on top of it, the way that you get to do it is you get to crash into their house at 3 a.m. wearing all your cool tactical gear that the taxpayer that you're raiding has paid for, right? And it makes me think of, a great example of this in our libertarian community is Duncan Lemp, right? Got red flagged.
Yep.
The SWAT team, instead of just going over to the house during the day, instead of people just showing up in the day saying, hey man, we got to take your guns, even though that's wrong, right? He was not threatening anyone, had no issues. They chose to, in the middle of, the very early morning when everyone was asleep, when he was asleep next to his pregnant girlfriend, they bust in, flashbanged. And, if you've ever been woken up in the middle of the night by something violent, like, it's very hard to tell, especially when these people are wearing tactical gear that's meant to obfuscate their ability to tell who they are and where they are at. It's very hard to tell what's going on. It could be anyone raiding your house at that moment. So he got up, Duncan Lemp was killed. They threw a flashbang into, they shot shots over his pregnant wife and his unborn son and flashbanged them. And there's no penalty, for the folks that did this, or the person that red flagged him, or the court that did not actually, grant him his rights and chose to take him away without any due process. And so these federally mandating and federally, legalizing these red flag laws and funding them is only going to create more situations like this where innocent people are killed for no other good reason than some police officer or judge's action bias, which is just really unfortunate. And if you want to talk about laws that kill people, I mean, this is the one that you can kind of point to directly and say, yeah, there's obvious repercussions.
Well, and think about in the status quo, the last thing I'll say is think about how common swatting is and how absurd and insane that is, how fatal it is. If you're not familiar, swatting is basically what it sounds like. People call in and say that there's some sort of, massive organization or child kidnapper at some address of some location, and literally stick a SWAT team on these people. And it's very popular when someone's been doxxed and, online streaming or just an unpopular personality. Think about how extreme that is, right? To say you're sending an entire SWAT team at someone for a to what they perceive as a practical joke at best and malicious at worst. And think about how high that barrier is, and think about how much lower the barrier is to report someone for to take away their guns. Right? You're not calling the SWAT teams on them. You're just taking away their guns. Think about how bad that is in terms of the ability to abuse and target people for that. And you get a coordinated group of people to report some popular figure you don't like. All they have to do is go to some judge who, isn't very unbiased, because that's not really a thing. And you get guns taken away like that for no good reason.
Yeah, I watched it. I'm glad you brought up swatting. I watched a great documentary on it on Netflix the other day, and basically one of the kids that did it, he got like 30 years or something like that in prison. And the guy that actually pulled the trigger that killed the innocent guy is still paid and part of the police staff. But anyways, this kid basically said, he's like, it was awesome, man. Like I could, if anyone pissed me off online, I could make a fake call and the police would go make their life hell for free for me. And I think that just really speaks to the action bias of the police state, where they just have all this gear, they've been funded so much, and they just want to use it, right? They want a good excuse to go use it, and that's why they'll go do all these things. They're not going to have a restrained hand in dealing with these types of red flags and when people, red flag you. All right, moving on to our next one. We've got this fella, and it's on Instagram, but I know he's a pretty big public figure. His name's Jamie Torkowski, and back in my emo days, I think we've gone through a few. He was the co-founder or the founder, I think, of To Write Love in Our Arms, kind of an emo anti-suicide organization that was really popular amongst us scene kids, and you've probably seen me wear some of their shirts in my past cringes. Really, I thought I looked up to him, but he's kind of turned not so great as of late. And anyways, for someone that is very pro-life, he's very anti-abortion. And he tweeted out he put it on his Instagram story, two things. And the first one is, yo, it's always wild how I never see any of the pro-life folks in my life out protesting and posting to demand universal health care, paid parental leave, free early childhood education, free infant daycare, free baby formula, and free easily acceptable contraception, a minimum universal basic income, more money for public schools, and maybe, most importantly, federally sanctioned vasectomies that aren't reversed until a man can prove he is financially and emotionally able to support the child. But maybe I missed those posts. And then he followed it up with another one, and it was a tweet out, and it said, if this was about babies, there would be universal health care, free education, free daycare. Southern states would be doing all they can to drop the Black maternal mortality rate. This is about power and control. And we've gone through these types of posts before in the past and pointed out the inconsistency, but I think it's important to do so again here, because we see this happen and we see these posts all over the place. People will say, well, you can't just be pro-birth, you need to be pro-life. And if you're pro-life and you care about these people, that means you support all of the different policy outcomes and policy initiatives that I support. And it's like, you know what? You can have both viewpoints, and I can also not support the things that you support. I can be anti-abortion. I can be pro-life, view humans that are in the womb as human beings that should not be killed. I can also believe that those people that when they're born should be taken care of, and that it would be best if they're taken care of, and that would be great if everyone that is in need could be, granted those needs and everything. And And I can also disagree that the best way to do it is for you to steal more of my money and everyone else's money to do that. What's so ironic about these people, man, is that they are on here posting about it. We need free healthcare. We need, free childhood education. We need UBI. And they all post about this stuff, and they post about and wax and wane about how people that are pro-life should be supporting this. It's like, you know what? The pro-life people that support being pro-life, they're out there working, making money, and donating to charity in greater rates than you do. And they're also taxed at a higher rate because they make more money. So even if we grant you the premise that tax dollars are a good thing, taxing the dollars from people is a good thing, these people are doing way better than you are just sitting there. This guy doesn't have a normal job. He's an influencer. These people are doing way more than you are just by working, to alleviate those things. And it's just really ironic to me that, this guy's full-time job is to wax and wane on social media about how other people aren't doing enough to help people the way that he wants them to help.
I'm worried that I'm going to miss something because there are so many ways to tear apart this idiotic sentiment. The first thing I'll say, that's a quick one because we've already broken it down in earlier episodes. Look at charity numbers. Look at how religious people overwhelmingly support charities and are charitable with their money. Okay, that's first thing. Okay, second, let's think about if okay, so presumably this person's a lefty. He doesn't like homelessness, right? So it's wild how I never see any of these pro-supporting homeless people in my life out protesting and posting to demand for universal mansions, free food service for life for homeless people, making everyone who owns a home give up a room in their house to, you can do this for any number of issues and take it to absurd extremes and think that actually, no, you don't have to support your laundry list of policies in order to, not want to kill children. That's actually kind of in the same way that I think we shouldn't bomb children in Yemen. I also don't think we should probably be dumping money into Yemen and sending them, massive payouts through federal aid funding and foreign aid, which I think is also a bad idea. So it's a stupid non-argument. Second, or third, it's not even true. What are the best and most populated resources for people in need? They're freaking religious institutions. Think about all of the Catholic hospitals alone that you know of. Like, not even the wider religious Christian, not even the wider Christian, not alone the wider, let alone the wider religious movements in general who are pro-life, who create hospitals. Think about all of the women's pregnancy centers that they want to go firebomb. Most of the crisis pregnancy centers that I know and that I support and things, and even institutions that aren't crisis pregnancy centers but other just broader clinics, they also provide family care and support for families post-birth. And these are the institutions that they try to demonize, they try to spit on, they try to literally burn down. And then when, even with them existing, if there's a chilling effect and there aren't more being created, they're like, oh, where are you? I don't know. Maybe they're hiding from you throwing a literal Molotov cocktail through their window, you jack. It makes me so mad because these people act like, why aren't they there? They are there, and you're burning them down. What do you mean? It's infuriating. I mean, these people will talk about stigmatizations and how media perceptions and not enough representation of sexual minorities is really harmful to youth. Yeah, you know what else is harmful to, pregnancy and crisis centers and family resources from popping up? Probably when you physically beat down their door and burn them because you're mad because you can't murder babies. Like, my goodness, these people are just so disconnected from reality. It makes me it truly boggles the mind.
Well, what's horrifying to me about it is that they are willing to entertain that lie that you just really well laid out. They're willing to entertain that lie and put it out there just to gain a few brownie points, right, from their friends and the people that follow them on social media. Because it's a really trendy, popular thing to say this, even though it's not based in any reality. Someone really close to me has worked with pregnancy crisis centers, and for every Planned Parenthood out there's 6 pregnancy crisis centers, right? There's way more. And not only are there 6 of them, they actually offer the whole gambit. of care. They not just when you're pregnant, but they also offer care after you have the kid, as well as if you had an abortion and you're like, man, that was a mistake. I need some like counseling or financial aid with this. Pregnancy crisis centers support the entire gambit of women's healthcare. And it's in stark contrast. Live Action posted this video on their Twitter feed with Cecilia Richards, basically when she had to testify before Congress, and she basically, there's this thing where all these politicians were saying, hey, if we do away with Planned Parenthood, it's not just abortions. Abortions are only 3% of what they do, which is not true. It's actually basically all of what they do. But women won't be able to get mammograms or anything like that, stuff that protects them from cancer. And then in 2015, Cecilia Richards had to testify before Congress and basically say, hey, we don't do mammograms, and we've never said we did. And they have a really nice kind of comparison and contrast video of that. And so, it's just really sad. These people at best are just trying to, they are ignorant and they're just getting on the bandwagon to get some social media credit. At worst, they know that they're lying, but they're doing it anyways to get credit. And these are people that cannot be trusted. They're people that have no value for the truth other than in if it serves them or not. That's the only truth that matters to them. And second, last of all, if you're a pregnant woman, like, know that there are tons of resources out there available to you. They're all over the place. And hopefully they're not being firebombed and not being destroyed by people like this. But they're out there and they provide much better care than Planned Parenthood or any of these other lefty organizations that are, purported women's health organizations.
And not only if you're a pregnant woman, if you've recently given birth, if you've given birth in the last couple of years, if you have a family and you're struggling, so many of these clinics, not only crisis pregnancy centers, other health organizations and family organizations will do that for you. And I'm just going to shout out 3W Medic. It's a fully licensed medical clinic, not a crisis pregnancy center, completely free medical care for women by University of Washington, run by my friends. I donate to them. You should look them up and donate to them too. And you'll have done more to help women and families in need than this guy who's criticizing you for, having a faith that tells you should take care of widows and orphans.
Yep. All right, our last one. It's kind of a two-parter. I'll do the first one, talk a bit about, and then I'll read the second. So the first one, you've probably seen this going around. This person tweeted out, the treatment for an ectopic pregnancy is abortion. The treatment for a septic uterus is abortion. The treatment for a miscarriage that your body won't release is abortion. If you can't get those abortions, you die. You, period, die. Now, this is just wrong on all fronts, right? It's, first of all, from a pro-lifer's perspective, this is not abortion. Abortion is, and our issue with abortion, which I think is more important, is that you are electively choosing to kill another living human being for whatever personal reason you have that is not in conflict with like your ability to live or survive. And so, treatment for an ectopic pregnancy, treatment for a septic uterus, when the health of the mother is concerned, you are not going in there to kill the human being just for pure convenience. You're going in there to save a life. And if you can save the baby's life, you would. But the fact of the matter is that in an ectopic pregnancy, for example, the fetus is not viable. It's not able to actually grow into a full human being because it's fallen into the fallopian tube. It's not actually viable. So you remove it, and if you could save it, you would, right? That's not an abortion. That's not the type of abortion, if it is an abortion, that we're concerned with. In addition to this, right, like you've got Planned Parenthood before, after this meme came out, and then people were like, nah, that's not actually right. Treatment for an ectopic pregnancy is not abortion. In fact, Planned Parenthood themselves cited that ectopic pregnancy treatment is not abortion. They've since removed that, which shows how honest they are, right? That was on their site for so long. But the broader pro-life movement does not believe that ectopic pregnancy, treatment for is abortion. In fact, there's not a single state law, to my knowledge, at the time of this recording, that has a law that bans for a woman or taking the fetus out, in cases where the life of the mother is at risk. So this is just a big fat lie. And I hate that it's a lie, and it's mainly, put out there by people that are lefty and that support abortion. And so it creates all this confusion, right? And people were saying, it's going to make it so that people can't get treatment for ectopic pregnancies and all this stuff. And then you see this, this post on the right that I saw shared. And basically there was some doctor somewhere that messaged in and said, hey, we're having, with this trigger law that came into effect, we're all so confused about the laws. And we had a woman come in with an ectopic pregnancy, and I had to be on the phone with a lawyer, and her fallopian tube ruptured, and now she, is in greater chance of dying. And this is what happens when you overturn Roe v. Wade. And it's like, dude, the reason why this doctor, in the best scenario, the reason why this doctor is confused is because you put out this information that you had not validated, you had not verified, you had not read into, this blatant lie, whether you believed it or not, and you confused a doctor. At best, that's what happened. At worst, you knew it was a lie. You put it out there for your own political, stuff. Or at worst, the doctor knows that it's a lie and is trying to prove his own point. And this is just a scenario of like their prophecy. It's a self-fulfilled prophecy, right? They put out this misinformation of the worst kind, and it delays treatment for a woman who is in need.
Yeah, I think if anything, this just shows the ridiculousness of laws and litigation and a horrible gummed up legal system too, if this was true. But yeah, the big culprit here is the lies that get spread about this. Like, you want to talk about harmful things. How about not spreading direct lies about what the proper treatment would be, what the proper even term of abortion means? Again, this is one of those things where the politically expedient term for all of this is just to call it all abortion. And that way, when they want to abort babies out of convenience and have that kind of a procedure, they can say, what, you mean when you say, hey, I'm against abortion? Then they can say, you're against saving a woman's life in need? Again, it's the whole context and action thing. To say that the action of removing a fetus from a womb prematurely is the same in the scenario where it's done in a way where it's pulled out limb by limb for convenience versus trying to take it out in order to, enact a medical procedure to save a woman's life. Those are entirely different contexts. The actions can be the same, but the context is different. And so this is just really simply one of those things, again, where if we have to draw the line at that, where, okay, let's ban all abortions except for these, except for ectopic pregnancies, septic uterus, and miscarriages. Okay, if those are your terms, we find those acceptable. Done. Okay. And then let's work from there, and let's work on refining. Yeah, I know. And the thing is, like, the best thing you can do if you have to work within these confines of the law is to make the law as narrow, as focused and specific as possible, and not overreaching. And so, like, okay, so Roe v. Wade's been overturned. There's no constitutional right to an abortion. Let's now work on protecting life. And if we have to do that incrementally, we'll do it incrementally, but let's get closer and closer to finding the right policy in the most, specific and narrow ways possible that protects women who are, legitimately in danger, in particular when the fetus has no life currently or has no real chance at life. But that's just the thing you have to do. You just have to get down to those narrow policies. But these people won't even let you take the broad step towards it. They always jump to the most extreme, specific, nuanced case, and you say, "Great, let's make room for everything." To the right of that. Everything to the right of that we'll say we can't do because it's not that specific. Let's leave plenty of room around the sides for these fringe cases to address. But instead, they would rather try to do an all or nothing thing, and then you end up with either lies like this story, or worst case, a truth of that story where people are operating based on lies and a bad legal system that is gumming up and slowing everything down.
Yeah, I saw this this article by the New York Times. I think it was the New York Times or it was the Washington Post. Same thing. But they were talking about, like ectopic pregnancies, and they admitted in little subtext. There was a little line in their article, like, oh yeah, like in all states like that have abortion laws, there's an exception for in scenarios where the life of the woman is at risk. Like in all of them. And they put a little caveat like yet or something like that. And then it's like further down, it's like, but doctors are still really confused about, this. It's like, dude, if you really cared about these people, you should put in big, bold letters that, hey, if a woman comes into my clinic with an ectopic pregnancy, she can be treated and it's going to be fine. And it's not against the law. If you really want to save lives, if you wanted to shine a light in the darkness, and to make everyone's lives better, and you want to clear up confusion instead of adding to the noise, that's a pretty important point. I think you should be getting out there. I think all doctors should be pretty clear on what the law says about this, and that they can treat women who are in a life-threatening situation. But no, they didn't choose to do that. It's a little byline in their in their article with the big bold focused on that doctors are confused and that women are going to die. It's like, no, okay, don't you care about then? Even if you disagree with what happened, shouldn't it still be important to you to make sure doctors are informed that they can actually treat these women? It's just so dishonest, man. And it's what really sickens me about it is, we talk about a lot of stuff on this show, but like on abortion, to me, like I don't have any reservations in believing I'm right? Like I'm always testing with whether it's our anarchist views or the views about the free market. I'm always testing. If I find something that's philosophically inconsistent, it keeps me awake at night until I am able to reason through it.
Yep.
I have already reasoned through this abortion thing. There is almost nothing anyone can say that convinced me otherwise about this. And for these people to do all this stuff for the case of like wanting to kill a baby, right? They're going to lie, bend over backwards, protest, firebomb pregnancy crisis centers, risk the lives of actual women, all for their right to kill a human baby. It's like, that's what sickens me the most about seeing these posts, man. It's like you're doing all this effort for something so wicked. There's just something, it's hard to reconcile it. It's almost a No Country for Old Men moment of just not understanding the evil that there is in the world.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add is that not only are these places not doing their due diligence, to your point earlier, but it's like, one, we knew this case was being decided, so you would think that you would update everyone with the legal, what you should know when the case went to court, when it was going to get picked up. Two, when the court was hearing the case. And three, when the court leaked the decision that would strongly implicate that there might be changes to the law. You kind of had three big moments, one of which was really big if you really cared about this kind of thing, that you would make known throughout your hospitals if you dealt with that, which maybe leads me to think that this story is maybe not as truthful as they
would. I agree with you there. But even if it was true, it's still awful. The principle,
it would just show a failure of, again, the legal system in some respects.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll leave it at that on that kind of sad note, but I think still powerful one. Thanks for hanging out with us for the show. We really appreciate it. Like we said at the beginning of the show, if you enjoyed what we're talking about, be sure to leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out, and we will catch you next time.